Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Eugene. My name is Chris Topaz. I use the pronouns she and her, and I'm your worship associate this morning. Today is Spirit Jam service, which means it will be together for the first 30 minutes, and then there are 4 activities that you can choose from. Don't worry, Zoom friends, there's something for you also. At the end of the hour, we'll come back together for our closing. We gather in worship to find meaning and to live more deeply. Worship creates connections within, among, and beyond us, calling us to our better selves, calling us to live with wisdom and compassion. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your image of the holy, we're glad you're here. If today's your first time, we'd love to get to know you. Right after service, you're invited to our welcoming room, which is located in the south entrance. If you're online, the link to our visitor form is being dropped into chat now. You can use your phone to access a copy of your order of service by scanning the QR codes that are scattered throughout the building. We also have a few large print copies that you can get from ushers. There you will find names of authors and composers. You'll find the text to choir anthems and resources used in our service. I'm going to invite you to greet each other, but today it's a little different because we really want the youth and children to do this too. As you say hello, paying attention to people you haven't met yet, if you want to, let's ask each other 2 questions. What is your name? And if you could have a superpower for one day, which one would you choose? All right. Today, Kino is going to light our chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, with words from Cynthia Landrum.
Flame of our faith, call us into the community of love and justice this morning and every morning.
And now, let's say together the words of our mission, which affirm our shared purpose. Empowered by love, we transform ourselves and serve our world. Good morning, everyone. I'm the Rev. Jen Youngsun, and I use the pronouns she and her. Today, on this Martin Luther King Jr. holiday weekend, we join with other UU congregations around the country for what is known as 30 Days of Love. And so we'll be wearing our shirts and we'll be celebrating the power of love for the next 30 days. We can feel love, right? We can feel love for our neighbors and our friends. We can feel love for the earth. We can feel love for our God. But until we put that love into action, it just remains potential. Or as Dr. King once put it, human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. Injustice must be rooted out by strong, persistent, and determined action. Love in action becomes kindness. Love in action becomes compassion. And love in action becomes justice. You can see that we are wearing our yellow t-shirts. This is the worship team, and we all encourage you, if you are willing and able, to show up for Justice tomorrow at tomorrow's MLK March and NAACP programs. If you want to carpool with us, just meet in the parking lot tomorrow morning at 9:30, or if you want to go by yourself, it's going to start at Autzen Stadium right across from the Serbu Youth Campus. Just get there before 10:30 and look for the sea of yellow shirts. The march is going to go from Autzen Stadium to the Holt Center. It's about a mile, and it's going to end at around 12 noon. And then the NAACP has programs scheduled for the entire afternoon. So if you want to stay for those, I hope you will. In preparation for tomorrow's events, you can choose today from one of 4, or you can do all of them if you want. We have 4 activities for you today. So, in the sanctuary with Joe Rondeau, you can sing justice and protest songs together. In the social hall with Tina Dio, you can make signs like that one for tomorrow's march. In the East Foyer with Ryan Doppelmayr, you can play Black History Jeopardy! And if you want something a little quieter, you can go to room 7 where there will be a TV. This is for the Zoom friends too. And I will be doing a history presentation on Zoom. So you can pick one or more of those events. We'll spend the next 20 minutes or so doing these activities, and then Tina will go around with a bell and draw us back in, and we'll do our closing. Yeah? All right. So go forth. Sanctuary, social hall, classroom 7, East Foyer. So I want to let you know that most of the information I'm sharing with you today came from this book. It's called A Peculiar Paradise by Elizabeth McLagan. And this is our copy. So you can find that in our library. And I used resources from the Museum of Natural and Cultural History in Eugene. Last summer, I think it was last summer or early fall, I took the church staff on a field trip to Lane County, the history museum that's just right down the street here. They're doing a Black history exhibit right now. It's completely free, and it's there until April. So if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go there. It's called Racing to Change, that exhibit. So race is not usually an easy topic to discuss in public settings, right? And a lot of people say, well, we're living in this post-racial landscape. And why do we need to dredge up all the past and talk about the difficulties of the past, especially here in Oregon? But race still continues to be the #1 determinant of things like access to healthcare, home ownership, graduation rates, and income. So it's important to keep talking about it. I know some people say, well, talking about this stuff makes white people feel guilty and ashamed. But, even though Oregon's racial history is unfortunate, I don't think it means that any of us need to feel guilty or ashamed. It is difficult to understand what's happening in today's context without understanding and making those connections with or to Oregon's history and the inequities that we still witness today. I know that a lot of you grew up in Oregon, so you know this history very well. But I also know that I'm not the only newcomer to Oregon. So this is part of my ongoing education, and I hope that it will inspire you to take action, whether it's going to the Lane County History Museum or showing up for the NAACP March and activities tomorrow, or joining our own church's Challenging Racism team. I just want to thank each and every one of you for your care and your commitment to racial justice in our town and in our state. So, there we go. As long as there have been white people in Oregon, there have also been Black people. Black sailors have landed in this area maybe as early as 1578 with the Sir Francis Drake expedition. Some were brought here certainly as slaves, but many others arrived as free persons looking for a better life, like a lot of us do. They opened boarding houses and stores. They worked in mines, mining for gold or coal. They cut lumber. Their numbers may have been small, but they managed to create wonderful, successful communities, and they led the way for fighting for racial justice. I want to introduce you to George W. Bush. No, not that one. This one. George Washington Bush was born free in Pennsylvania, and he arrived in the Oregon Territory with his wife and 6 sons. But once they arrived, they learned that the provisional government of the Oregon Territory had banned Black people from living here. And so they decided to cross the Columbia River and settle north in the area around Puget Sound. So before Oregon became a state, the provisional government was formed in the Oregon Territory, and they decided that they would prohibit slavery, and they decided that they would expel any Black persons in the territory. This would be the first exclusion law. And additionally, it said that if you failed to obey this order, you would be publicly flogged with, quote, no less than 20 and no more than 39 stripes. So the greatest impact of this Exclusion Act was not necessarily how many Blacks were whipped or expelled, but it had that deterrent effect that kept Black immigrants like George Bush out of the Oregon Territory. That law was quickly rescinded a few years later. But even more far-reaching in terms of creating an almost permanent inequality and inequity in Oregon was this thing called the Donation Land Act of 1850. Basically, in 1850, the US government offered 320 acres of land to any white settler willing to cultivate it. And it gave 640 acres to any married couple. But it specifically excluded Native Americans, African Americans, and Hawaiians. By removing most Indians to the reservations and excluding all but white land ownership, that vision of a white homeland in Oregon was embedded in public policy. And, you know, it precluded people of color from having that generational wealth, building that generational wealth, and the effects we are seeing still today. I want to introduce you to Jacob Vanderpool. We don't have a photo of him, but apparently Jacob is the first and only known person to be expelled from Oregon under the exclusion laws. Jacob was born in the West Indies. He was classified mulatto, the term for biracial in those times. It seems that maybe his mother was an enslaved African woman and his father was a Dutch plantation owner. But in the 1850s, Jacob was doing pretty well. living in Salem and apparently owned a boarding house and was doing well, but someone called him out on it, and he was arrested and jailed, and his crime was living in Oregon as a Black person. We don't really know what happened to Jacob Vanderpool after he left Oregon, but some people have found some census figures that say that perhaps he moved to San Francisco and carried on with his life and started a family there. So when Oregon was preparing for statehood, they had to decide a couple of things. One was the question of slavery. Across the state at this time, just about 25% of the voters were in favor of slavery. But of course, as you can see, that kind of support really varied from county to county. There was quite a difference from county to county. In Lane County, 40% voted in favor of slavery. So it kind of gives you an idea of the differences geographically within Oregon. Most of you probably know about Oregon's exclusion clause in the first Constitution. So in this particular clause, it talks about the right to vote, saying that no Negro, Chinaman, or mulatto shall have the right of suffrage. And then this is the section that has the explicit exclusion language. No free Negro or mulatto not residing in the state at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall come, reside, or be within the state, or hold any real estate, or make any contracts, or maintain any suit. So you can see the rest there. You know, this explains to a certain extent why our church in Eugene, why our city, why our state has so few Black people in it. But the exclusion laws can't really explain all of it, because we have to remember that when people were traveling west, the people who were of African descent were enslaved. Many of them were enslaved. And so they didn't even have the option to come. They didn't have the choice to come to Oregon. So that's something to keep in mind, that it wasn't just the exclusion laws, but it was the nation's system and institution of slavery that also kept people from coming west. The Black exclusion clause, as you can see down here, was eventually repealed in 1926. Despite all of these efforts to exclude Black people in Oregon, many of them continued to make good lives here in Oregon. And it really depended on the town, and it depended on the people that they encountered in those towns, whether they were able to live free and have a good life. So I want to introduce you to Wiley Griffin. Here he is in this photo over here. Wiley was the first Black person in Eugene that was actually documented and mentioned by name, and that's because Wiley was the first Black employee at the University of Oregon. He worked in one of the dormitories. And then I want to introduce you to Louisa Sewell. They were contemporaries. They were living in Oregon at about the same time in 1890. Wiley in Eugene, and Louisa and her family lived in Canyon City, and they made a very good life for themselves. She was raised in Richmond, Virginia, but moved out here with her husband. They ran a hauling business. And in her writing, she says that she never experienced any prejudice or discrimination and lived very peaceably with the neighbors out there. And the next couple of people I want to introduce you to are Taylor Stewart and Alonzo Tucker. So it really did depend on where you lived, if you could have kind of a peaceful life. Again, we don't have a picture of Alonzo Tucker, but in 1902, Alonzo was a shoeshine man and a boxer, and apparently owned a gymnasium for boxing in Coos Bay. He was just one of about 36 people living in that area. And he was suspected of raping a white woman. And although there was no trial, there was just a mob who shot and then hung him. Alonzo Tucker is reportedly the only person ever lynched in the state of Oregon. In Montgomery, Alabama, there's a place called the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, and it has been collecting soil from the places all over the country where there was a known lynching. So Taylor Stewart, a Portland State University student, wanted to make sure that the lynching of Alonzo Tucker was not forgotten. And so he collected soil from that area and sent it into the museum and made sure that Coos Bay remembers that this happened. So this is Beatrice Morrow Kennedy. I wish I could have met her. She sounds like a really amazing person. She helped to establish the NAACP here in Portland. It was the first chapter of the NAACP to be formed in 1914 west of the Mississippi. And she also was the owner and editor of The Advocate. The Advocate was a Black weekly newspaper, and it really highlighted all of the news from the local area and was a very, very important publication for the Black community. In the 1920s, Oregon had the highest number of KKK members, Ku Klux Klan members, per capita in the United States. And by 1923, there were over 35,000 active KKK members in the state of Oregon. Walter Pierce was one of them, and he was elected governor of Oregon. We're running out of time. This happened in Grants Pass, where one day a white resident from Grants Pass had gone west and found that a lot of her white friends had Black servants. And so she came back to Grants Pass with a few Black servants to work in her home. And that prompted an editorial in the Grants Pass newspaper that had this headline. We are going to have to stop here because we're going to, I have a couple of more pictures, but Oregon's Black history is rich and interesting, and I encourage all of you to go out and find out for yourself and just never quit learning. Let's go back into the sanctuary and sing together our closing hymn. All right? Thanks. And now let's say our closing words together as Tina extinguishes our chalice. Thank you. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And now go out into this wonderful day and into this inspiring weekend. May you be inspired to action, to more love, to bringing more compassion and equity in the world. I hope to see you tomorrow. Go in peace, everyone.